Speaking of Donald Trump, he was on Ben Shapiro's podcast yesterday. We can show he was at an event. This is C1. You can see he was at an event with Donald Trump earlier this week. That was on the anniversary of October 7th. So Trump went to, did you catch this in New York?
And here he says, do you want me to sign this?
Right, yes. Yes, and you can see him with Ben Shapiro there, and he was at the grave of Rabbi Schneerson in New York. You know more about this than I do, but that was the Lubavitcher prominent, it's a big deal that Donald Trump went there, which is why Ben Shapiro obviously came up for it. On the anniversary of October 7th, you can see Trump is wearing a yarmulke there, and the next day, he went on Shapiro's show. So we have some thoughts from this. We have some clips from this, some highlights from this. Let's take a listen.
It was really an honor to introduce you to the family of an American citizen currently being held hostage by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. That citizen's name is Idan Alexander. I wanted to thank you for that. The family was very grateful to you, obviously, for taking the time to meet with them. And, it was really a meaningful experience. Wonder if you wanted to say something about the situation for that family and the other families like them.
I thought from a religious standpoint, it was so beautiful. I had not been that aware. As you know, I'm not Jewish, but I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, to put it mildly. With my father being a Brooklyn builder, I knew lots of Jewish people, almost exclusively, if you want to know the truth. But I thought it was a beautiful, he was explained the whole thing and how it worked. And it was very beautiful, ceremonial. And I got to meet the family, and they were great. The young brother is very close to his brother, who's hopefully somewhere right now. I mean, they really don't know. It must be almost harder when they just don't know. They're not sure whether or not he's alive or not alive. They think he is. But, being alive over there now is rough stuff. And before it was rough, but now it's probably even rougher.
And some people, even on our side, seem to suggest that you're some sort of total isolationist, want to slash the military. You and Senator Vance have said that your foreign policy is peace through strength. Can you describe what your second-term foreign policy will look like?
Yeah, number one, he wouldn't have taken Kyiv because you wouldn't have had a war. And you would have had the country just the way it is. Our policy is very simple, peace through strength. We had no wars, and I'm not an isolationist. I helped a lot of countries. I kept countries out of war. We had two countries, smaller countries. I can explain it later, and I can explain who they are when we're together. But they were fighting, and they've been fighting for 1,000 years, and they go back and forth, and they were going to fight again and kill tens of thousands of people. And I said, look, you do that, there's going to be no trade. There's going to be tariffs put on your head. There'll be no trade, and that's for both of them, et cetera, et cetera. And 2 days later, they call me up that they've made peace. I do these things. Nobody ever even heard of it. Iran was broke when we had no terrorism. We had no attacks. We had no Hamas problems, no Hezbollah problems. We had nothing because Iran didn't have the money to give to them because I put sanctions on and I dealt directly. And you know what I was asking for, Ben? One very simple thing. I don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. Very simple. Everything else, I want them to have a great life. I want them to be rich. But I just didn't want them to have a nuclear weapon. I would have been able to do that very easily. But when the Kamala and these people say about Kyiv, and people call it Kiev and they call it Kyiv. I've always called it Kiev. And it depends on what part of the world you come from is what I finally figured out.
Okay, so Ben, if you were listening to that, was laughing the last bit and had a bemused look on his face for a couple of the other moments as well. Rabbi Schneerson passed away in 1994 and is obviously very big for the Chabad movement. So that's where Trump and Shapiro were in there. You're right, Ryan. He did seem like he asked to sign a prayer book. And it looks like the rabbi said no. But the next day, he goes on the Shapiro show. Shapiro, by the way, it should be noted, is not pretending to be like an objective guy here. He's fundraised for Donald Trump. He held the fundraiser for him back in the spring, I think. So he's pretty openly, much like Howard Stern, is openly pro-Kamala Harris and pro-Democratic Party establishment. Shapiro's pro-Trump in this case. What did you make of how Trump responded to those questions?
And as producer Mac points out, background on Idan Alexander, he's now 20. He was born in Tel Aviv, grew up in New Jersey, graduated high school in New Jersey, then moved to Israel, joined the IDF, and was stationed outside of Gaza, and was captured on on October 7th. Trump doing his best, I guess, to care about any of this stuff. We all know exactly what he's going to say every time it comes up. That he has no real solution for anything. He's just going to say, if I was president, none of this would have happened, and just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, that's his favorite line.
Yeah.
And, he doesn't expound on it like Kamala Harris tries to expound on this line about what's different between her and Joe Biden. She really could just say, I'm not Joe Biden, and let everyone stew in the awkward silence and move on. That's what Trump does. He's like, if I was president, none of this would have ever happened. And you can kind of get away with it because it's impossible to deny. It is true, she is not Joe Biden. And it is true that if he was president, we don't know what would have happened.
We don't know. Can't prove him wrong.
Know.
Yeah.
I actually think there's a decent argument for that on Ukraine, but we don't need to open up that particular can of worms.
Ukraine's possible for sure. It galls me when he does it on October 7th, though, because October 7th had so much to do with the Abraham Accords. They've been explicit that the Abraham Accords, cutting Palestinians out of normalization in the Middle East, incentivized them and drove them to violently put themselves back into the conversation. Like, that's what they have said. It also is exactly what people predicted would happen if you tried to do Middle East peace without the Palestinians. And so he kind of put all the kindling out there, threw a match in it, walked away. And then when it starts burning, he's like, oh, if I was still around here, that wouldn't happen. It's like, no, I'm sorry. Ukraine, maybe. Quite plausible. Who knows? You guys seem tight. But this one, no. This is on you.
Well, on Ukraine, I mean, Trump actually armed Ukraine, and a lot of Republicans were very happy about that at the time. So anyway, this is in the context of huge reporting from Bob Woodward, which I honestly don't believe a word of, and we might disagree on that, but I don't believe a word of what he wrote on Joe Biden or Donald Trump, frankly.
Doesn't he usually have direct sources and tapes and people just spill their guts to him?
Yeah, some people do. If
Bob Woodward is listening, people talk. It's just the rule of Washington.
So, right, yeah, the big reporting is that he claims a Trump aide says that maybe Trump and Putin spoke about 7 times, maybe as many as 7 times since Donald Trump left the White House. So former president.
Just catching up.
There's all kinds of things to talk about. And
Putin actually speaks English to him. Like, he drops the whole "I don't speak English" thing. Is that what?
I didn't see that,
goes?
But yeah. So the book is out next week.
I'm just joking.
Oh, I thought you were saying that was actually in the report, and I was like, that would be quite a good detail.
It's possible.
But I think the book comes out on October 15th. Well, the reason that sounded somewhat plausible to me is that some of the reporting is about how Putin was given Abbott COVID tests by Trump and told Trump not to be public about it, allegedly, because it would reflect poorly on Trump. Putin was concerned about Trump, according to Bob Woodward's reporting, which is also somewhat strange to me. But anyway, that's why I think in the context of all of that, I think that's especially interesting in the context of all the Ukraine conversation is especially interesting in the context of all of that. It also said that MBS has a burner phone labeled Trump and a burner phone labeled Jake Sullivan, according to one of Bob Woodward's sources.
That's definitely possible. I reported years ago that there was a WhatsApp group that had Jared Kushner, Netanyahu, MBZ, and MBS. And I think that all of their intelligence, their various intelligence services were like, yeah, what are you doing? Get yourself a burner.
Yeah, you're not going to want to be doing that on your iPhone. But anyway, so that was Donald Trump on Ben Shapiro's show. But both of them clearly, both Trump and Kamala Harris, clearly making the rounds of kind of their partisan media or their ideological media friends. I don't know if that really changed any minds. I doubt that changed any minds. Pretty much everyone who's listening to Shapiro is already with Donald Trump and probably isn't making up their minds based on this in particular anyway. So
yeah, I doubt it. Or actually, there might be a bunch who are wondering whether to vote. Because whenever you're talking to a large enough crowd of Americans, you're talking to many, many people who are on the fence about voting.
That's a good point. Ben definitely does have like never Trump people in his audience. So people who are just like sort of regular, probably educated, upper middle class suburban voters who might be, like, a lot of people take for granted that the Abraham Accords were a period of calm and stability. Like, that's taken as fact, that, the Abraham Accords actually were solving the problem in the Middle East
Rather
as
than
opposed to
helping to further it. Yeah.
potentially. You're right. So like the Republican line is that, listen, contrast the era of the Abraham Accords with the era of October 7th. Like, this is
Except Biden picked up the Abraham Accords and carried them forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Jake Sullivan was bragging about it like a week before October 7th.
Yeah.
So anyway,
and
I think
all the architects still in power.
Yeah.
And Jared Kushner with a $2 billion private equity fund.
And Howard Stern, when he was courting Hillary Clinton to go on his show, was saying specifically to the campaign, he writes about this in his memoir, specifically saying to the campaign, we have truckers, persuadable people who might be thinking about voting for Donald Trump, but if you talk to
Howard
them,
Stern.
If you talk to them and you make your case to them on my show, it might actually swing some votes. So you can see where Kamala Harris would come into that and say, but I don't know how many of those undecided voters are actually still listening to Stern, honestly.
I think a lot of them are, because he still has a talent for speaking.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
People need shows that are hours long. if they have a lot of window time they got to get through in the day.
Especially live stuff. Yeah.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.